For thousands of years, navies of the world duked it out for supremacy. Over the millennia, the importance of a strong navy has grown. From the ancient Egyptians' Battle of the Delta 3,000 years ago, ancient Greeks and Persians, the warring states of China, to the British Empire, to the now infamous World War II battles. In the Pacific, these battles were massive and ultimately decided the fate of the war. Aircraft carriers, widespread submarine use, and more brought about the modern era of naval warfare. Ever since, the aircraft carrier has been seen as the pinnacle of powerful navies, but that is slowly starting to change. With larger, faster, and more powerful weapons, these large ships are becoming vulnerable. The US is even considering to cut production of the Ford-class aircraft carriers. So what is in store for the future of the Navy? But first, our sponsor, World of Warships. This game is a lot of fun. It's a naval combat strategy game where strategy really matters, but it balances action and strategy really well. You take command of one of hundreds of ships from the World War II and earlier era, each of which are incredibly accurate to the real thing. All the most iconic ships from the era are included, like the World War II USS Iowa and the German Kaiser battleship from World War I. And the graphics are beautiful. I've spent a lot of time just admiring the ships in port. I've heard they spend 6 months modeling each ship, adding different textures and passes like rust, reflections, and even damage. The awesome thing is that they are extremely active in the community, always making adjustments when necessary for balance, adding new ships, updates, missions, even full new features such as aircraft carriers and submarines. And it's all free to play. Absolutely worth checking out. New players signing up with my link get a bunch of additional perks, including 700 doubloons, 1 million credits, 7 days of premium account time, and 2 premium ships. So go check them out and use that link down in the description. You won't be disappointed. The pinnacle of modern navies, the aircraft carrier, has a questionable future. Ever since World War II, these ships have served as the ultimate show of force. The capabilities they give their operators are enormous. It's a floating, mobile airbase that can operate anywhere in the world's oceans. That's always been the value of a navy throughout the history of warfare, the ability to project force beyond your nation's borders. But that can soon change. Weapons, such as anti-ship missiles, have put even the most powerful vessels at risk, and from longer and longer ranges. During World War II, even the biggest guns of the biggest battleships had a maximum range of 40 kilometers, and a realistic effective range of much shorter. Anti-ship missiles today will commonly have ranges of 200 kilometers or even longer, and are extremely accurate as it's guided. The first use of anti-ship missiles in combat by naval ships was in 1967 between Egypt and Israel. Egyptian missile boats, armed with Soviet P-15 missiles, sunk an Israeli destroyer, the INS Eilat, from 40 kilometers away. This ushered in a new era of naval warfare. Every ship was now at risk, even at long ranges. The battlefield shrunk dramatically. With the sinking of the INS Eilat, navies across the world began to scramble to develop systems to protect their ships. Guns, surface-to-air missiles, and electronic countermeasures, along with chaff, have been the mainstay of defending naval vessels ever since. Defensive systems, like CIWS and missiles, were placed all over ships to try to protect them, but it's questionable just how effective these actually are. I might be missing something here, but I could not find a single time where a CIWS ever successfully shot down an incoming anti-ship missile in combat. The American Phalanx CIWS failed to engage anti-ship missiles on a few occasions. The Phalanx installed on the USS Stark failed to engage 2 Exocet missiles in 1987 and was hit. And also the Israeli INS Hanit was hit by a Chinese-made anti-ship missile after its Phalanx and other defenses failed. Also, surface-to-air missiles have a questionable effectiveness. The HMS Sheffield was sunk by anti-ship missiles despite being armed to defend against them. And even more recently, in 2016, it's questionable if the USS Mason was able to successfully intercept incoming missiles, or just got lucky. To make things worse, anti-ship missile technology continues to evolve at a greater pace than defenses. Sea-skimming missiles, flying extremely low, can avoid detection only until seconds before impact. Missiles like the 3M54 caliber boost up to 3 times the speed of sound in its terminal phase. So even when the missile is close enough to be seen and engaged, that time to react is drastically reduced. Also, anti-ship ballistic missiles have come about, most notably in China. Defending against ballistic missiles has always been extremely difficult due to their flight trajectory and speed. And speaking of speed, hypersonic anti-ship missiles are just coming into operation. so it's becoming incredibly difficult to keep naval ships safe. And further complicating matters for the Navy is the increasing cost and construction time to build ships. During World War II, new destroyers, cruisers, submarines, and even aircraft carriers could be built in relatively short time frames. Thousands of ships were built by the US during the war. In 1939, the US Navy had only 394 ships. By the end of the war, in 1945, it had 6,768. Today, it takes several years to construct each warship. While construction could definitely be ramped up during wartime, it's doubtful many ships could be built before the end of the war, due to how complex ships have become, with computers, sensors, and missile systems. Also, modern wars progress at high speed. It's likely each country will only have whatever ships they have available at the start of the war to fight with. Same is true with missiles. Modern naval warfare relies heavily on missiles, be it anti-ship missiles, land attack cruise missiles, or defensive surface-to-air missiles. These missiles have extremely complex guidance systems, which requires special factories to construct them. In a war, it's possible each side could quickly run out of these missiles, leaving the ships operating them empty. Therefore, countries might be extremely cautious with their fleets, minimizing their exposure to threats to make them last. Price is another problem. Aircraft carriers now cost over $10 billion each, and have several $billion more worth of equipment, such as aircraft and munitions on board. Destroyers, like the newest Arleigh Burke class, are costing nearly $2 billion, again with hundreds of millions of dollars more in weaponry. Unlike 50 years ago, modern naval ships require complex networks of radars, countermeasures, and other sensors, all linked together with complicated computer systems, on top of the extremely expensive weaponry. This all costs a lot of money. These skyrocketing costs means countries have to cut back on the number they purchase. For example, in 1960, the US operated over 800 vessels. Today, they have only 1/3 of that, with half the number of aircraft carriers, 1/3 the number of destroyers, 0 frigates, and half as many submarines. And it isn't just the US Navy. Costs are up across the board, and most countries have a significantly smaller navy than before. While it's true that a modern destroyer, for example, has much more capabilities than a destroyer from 1960, the problem is, with less ships, losing one becomes much more painful, as you don't have many to replace it. With the US Navy again, of its fleet of 11 aircraft carriers, only 3 or 4 are deployed at any given time, the rest either between deployments or undergoing maintenance. And even those that are deployed are often spread across the world. In the event of a sudden conflict, the loss of one carrier in a region could greatly reduce the US's ability to operate there. It could take days or even weeks before a new carrier could arrive from another region. US aircraft carriers currently operate on one deployment for 6 months, every 32 months. This means that less than 19% of its time is spent deployed. When not deployed, the fastest one can be sent out is 30 days. If it's undergoing major maintenance or overhauls, that time is much longer. And with the extreme speed current warfare is fought at, that is too long. The conflict could be over before it's ready, and a similar situation exists with other warships and submarines. This means an aggressor, with increasingly more capable and significantly less expensive air and ground launch weapons, can potentially eliminate an entire deployed navy, like that of the US, from increasingly longer ranges. The Chinese DF-26D can hit ships over 3,000 kilometers away, creating a massive protective zone around China where no ship is safe. And as technology progresses, it's only going to get worse for ships. It might get to the point where you can no longer operate these massive, incredibly expensive ships, like supercarriers. At the same time, breakthroughs in military tech has always been met with a way to counter it. The sword brought about the shield, the castle, then the trebuchet, the aircraft, and then the anti-aircraft gun. The pendulum swings back and forth. It could be that a new defensive system could protect large naval vessels. The surface-to-air missile has seemed to hit a limit. They are large, expensive, and take up a lot of space that could be used for other weapons, so other defensive methods need to be devised. The most popular recently is lasers. With lasers, it can be much cheaper per shot and take up much less space on board. However, there are many downsides to lasers, such as the power requirements and the sensitivity of the lenses and various parts. Lasers will undoubtedly become more prevalent in the future, but it's still questionable how effective they could be against hypersonic weapons, ballistic missiles, and saturation attacks involving dozens of incoming missiles. Another option that has been in and out of development is guided munitions fired from the ship's main guns that can hit targets in the air, like aircraft and possibly even missiles. Also, electronic warfare could offer a bigger defense. This has already been used for decades. In 1973, Israel was able to employ electronic countermeasures, along with chaff, to decoy multiple incoming Syrian anti-ship missiles during the Battle of Latakia. Nearly every ship today is armed with radar jamming systems, making it harder to be hit. But the ever-increasing capability of newer anti-ship missiles has developed multiple forms of guidance to get through jamming, including using artificial intelligence. It could one day be possible to completely fry an incoming missile's electronics. Some extremely powerful radars, like the Israeli Green Pine, can potentially be used as directed energy weapons, short-circuiting electronics such as guidance systems. One day, ships might be able to operate similar systems on board, giving them the ability to defend themselves against attacks. Similar systems, however significantly less powerful, are already seeing development and operational use to defend against drones. The problem is, this, along with lasers, require huge amounts of power to operate. This has already been a problem the US Navy is running into. The US Arleigh Burke-class destroyer does not have enough extra power to operate these lasers they want to install. Another option is to build smaller, less expensive ships, and more of them. That way, not only could you deploy a greater number, but also losing them would not be as costly. Also, having autonomous ships, which can eliminate the need for a crew and the risk of loss of life, and also able to cut back on all the supplies and systems a crew needs, such as bunks, food, etc. This can allow for more weapons to be placed on smaller platforms. As for aircraft carriers, they will likely go smaller as well. No more supercarriers. In the far future, these could also go unmanned, operating, launching, and recovering unmanned aircraft. So it's going to be an interesting time in the future for the Navy.